Francine Cornell and Amberlynn McConey join us now. Welcome. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Tom, for having us.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
How difficult was that to speak at that forum last spring?
It was very difficult. It was still very raw. It's still hard today. But I felt it was very important that we got the word out of where this horrific disease can lead you, you know, and help try and stop the stigma.
And difficult because not only were you speaking before about 1,000 people there, but as you mentioned, it was only a few months after Stephen's death.
Yes.
So it was still very raw still. And
Yeah.
But you felt it was important for you to be there?
Very important. And this was one of Stephen's dreams. He left behind like three-ring binders of his dreams and hopes to fulfill, that he wanted to get out and advocate, make people aware of what this disease does to you, and he wanted to help educate families so that we could detect as well quicker, because the drug's very insidious. It helps them hide it as well, you know. And he wanted to get into the schools and do impact programs to help educate the young, you know, that it's just not something you can play around with, that once you do it and you become addicted, it owns you now.
And so you wanted to carry on
I want to
what Stephen wanted to do.
Yeah. I don't want his death in vain.
And you talk about starting at an early age. Stephen was only a teenager, right, when it started?
He started with marijuana. He went to mushrooms. Stephen's biggest problem really was he was a follower. He wanted people to like him, so he was game for anything. So if they said, hey, let's try this, he did. You know, he then went to DXM, and then after that, it was the opiates.
And did that start, like with so many people, as a prescription for painkillers that he was taking?
No, he wasn't prescription.
He wasn't prescribed it at all, but
some of his friends introduced it to him.
They did.
Yes.
And that started him down the road to heroin, was like so many others, was the opiates, the prescription painkillers.
He told me one time he was home from a halfway house, and I said to him, Stephen, whatever made you go to something like that? You know, of course, as parents, we feel guilty. Where'd we go wrong? And he did assure me. He said, Mom, it's nothing you did. He said, I just tried it with friends. I thought I could dilly-dally, and that's just what he said, and have my fun. And then, how do you put it? Like, put my big boy pants on and go on in life, something like that. And he said, Mom, I'm telling you, if I did 5, 6 of them, I did a lot. And he said, before you know it, I was waking up in the middle of the night craving it. I was craving it before I went to bed. So he's one of the few that it only took a few. And
for some, I know the moving on to heroin is because heroin is actually cheaper than getting the pills. Did Stephen ever talk about whether that was part of it, that he went to the heroin because it was easier to get, cheaper to get?
Much cheaper. And then they put that coating on it. And he said it was harder to crush them. So
he was at a halfway house in Schenectady.
Yes, he was.
And he was doing well.
Yes. First time in a long time, the day before, he called me that morning, all excited because I was going down that following Sunday to take him out to dinner and stuff. So they have to put passes in. So he had to find out what time. And then his niece, we were having a graduation party for his niece, all excited about that and what time. Well, I had to have him come up on the bus, so they had to have proof that I said I would pay for him to come up, and then I was bringing him back, all excited. The first time in a long time I heard that excitement in his voice.
And he was making good progress. He was excited about the prospects of seeing his daughter, being reunited with his daughter. Had he not been able to see her for a while? And
no, not for a while.
He was hopeful that they would be able to be reunited.
Yep.
And so it sort of out of the blue.
Just I was shocked. I I still have I don't even remember that day, to be honest with you.
The day you got the call?
Yeah. Yeah. I just remember screaming in the phone, tell me no, tell me no. Yeah.
Was that a day you had feared, though, for many years, that
Yes.
that day could come?
I feared opening his bedroom door and finding him that way for many years. Yeah. But Stephen relapsed when he was down in Schenectady, and they moved him to another halfway house. Where he was, it really wasn't what you call a really bad area, because he was next to the Union College.
Mm-hmm.
So they moved him to another halfway house, which was in the ghettos. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but right across the road was a convenience store that they literally were selling drugs right in front of that store.
Really? So right next door. And he could access those drugs?
Oh, yeah.
He could get those
Yeah.
drugs, no problem.
In fact, he said, Mom, if you go in that store, they'll ask you what you want. Well, naive Mom said, you mean if I want a soda, they'll go in and get it for me? And he giggled. He said, no, Mom, it's the choice of drug you want. But they would follow him up the street when they came out of the halfway house and ask him. And
So even though he was at a treatment facility, he was still exposed to it and could easily get the heroin.
Yep.
He thought he was using heroin
Yes.
the day he died. He probably had no clue that it was laced with such a potent amount of fentanyl.
Fentanyl, exactly.
Yeah.
And you see the problem, Tom, with getting funding for these homes. It has to be approved by communities. And unfortunately, talking about breaking the walls of stigma, unfortunately, the communities that approve the homes, many times, it's in the very high poverty neighborhoods, absolutely. So, when, my mother states, that it was a high poverty area, that's absolutely what it was, So hopefully in the future we can get homes established, in better communities, maybe where the resources and the networking is close for these addicts, and more comfort, instead of putting that demon right in front of their face.
You mentioned at the Strand back in April, the night that you spoke, that you didn't know a lot about the halfway house. You didn't really know a lot about his treatment and his recovery. That as a family, you felt sort of out of the loop.
Yep.
And that you were hopeful that maybe somehow you could help change that.
Yes, absolutely. The halfway houses have too much freedom. Like, he could sign out that I'm going to a meeting. That doesn't mean they're going to a meeting. I do believe there should be buddy system, stronger support. When Stephen was here in Plattsburgh halfway house, when he signed out I'm going home, I guarantee you within a half hour they called the house to see if Stephen arrived. It needs to be a wraparound program. And the loved ones need to. I contacted the first day he went into this facility and let them know that, I was 100% behind Stephen's recovery, that I'd like to be kept in the loop, but even when he relapsed, it was Stephen that called me. And I called them. They told me that Stephen had asked for higher care. The house supervisor was 100% for it, but then it had to go to outpatient. They decide. Well, even though Stephen was bad and relapsed, he wasn't violent. He had no mental illness. He had only that he relapsed. So they didn't think that he fit the criteria to go in higher care, even though he told them, I don't trust myself. They moved him to this other halfway house instead.
And if he had gone to another type of facility, perhaps
It would have been different.
It would have been more rigid. So, and I think a more rigid program, I support that. Just watching my brother struggle through the years, I support, empowering the addicts, getting them out in the community, working out in the community with community service. They have a lot of downtime and recovery, beginning, in a halfway house. They have hours of downtime where their mind is just wandering. A lot of programs feel that getting out in the work field is an overload. But we must, as humans, we must also look at the fact that going to work, whether it be going to work or going back to school, or, I understand recovery is number one, but recovery doesn't support you either, and to give the addicts some way to give them back their self-worth. Because by the time that they've hit, the detox centers, the rehab centers, and, now they're going through a halfway house, they're pretty much stripped of everything. I recently had a friend of mine, a professional in the community, and she took the step with going to detox, and she said, Amber, I literally felt it stripped me at the door. She's actually thinking about writing a book just on that we don't always see that inside track of, how the addict feels emotionally. So, like my mother said, a wraparound support system, and I feel that would include giving them back some empowerment and self-worth through that program, working in our communities.
You talked about the stigma a little bit earlier on. There is a real stigma.
Yes, there is.
To drug addiction, especially heroin, and so many people have this notion, this image of what heroin addicts look like, and in so many cases, they're wrong.
Yes, they are.
And you are working to try to address that?
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter if you wear a suit coat or if you wear the sweatpants. You can be an addict and people don't even know it. Like I said, the drug's very insidious, so it helps you to cover it up as well,
And I feel as, even taking a proactive approach, educators today, to say high risk, okay, high risk looks different too. Many people think high risk as maybe that student that doesn't succeed and, doesn't pass, any test and really struggles and, need many interventions through their education. And that's not always the case, Our life is a perfect example. We grew up in the same home. Stephen never brought a book home, and boy, he could come home with an A, I had to work for every A and B I received. He was an excellent athlete, could not just make the baseball team or the basketball team. He was an overachiever. So that high risk looks different. I was a runner, tried out for the basketball team and fouled out, and after the first year, that was it. Yeah. So, the same family dynamics, and just two different individuals. So for us to really, I really hope that, with putting ourselves out there, my mother and I, it brings awareness that all these pictures look differently, Like Mom said, a suit coat, whether you wear a suit coat, to work, or you're a stay-at-home mom in your sweatpants, whether you are living in income housing or, in a high-end, community, the outcome can still be the same. And that paralyzing phone call that my mom received.
And we're seeing how it's ripping families apart. there aren't many families here in the North Country that aren't touched by it somehow.
No.
Janet Dupree said that at the Lights of Hope.
One way or another, it could be
candlelight
your neighbor
ceremony.
child, it could be your coworker's child, it could be your coworker, and you not even know it, you know?
You've started a support group.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and what you hope that will do.
It's called Never Lose Hope, Learn to Cope. We want to be there to support, exactly. But one of our main goals is to support, educate, and advocate. If we don't have the answer for you, we'll do everything in our power to get answers for the people that come in. And the biggest is advocating, getting it out there, help stop this stigma. And my biggest dream is to go and fight for a law. Not sure what law, but I really want to go into Albany and advocate.
And you're not only helping the addicts, you're helping their family members who
yes.
in many cases are struggling themselves.
It's a family disease.
How do we help? How do we cope? And
Exactly.
what they're going through is what you've been going through.
Exactly.
And when at first, you know, the opiate addiction, I don't think anyone totally understood it until these past few years. So I don't think they knew how to treat it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did feel like I was in this battlefield all by myself, fighting the war, because they didn't have answers. I mean, I got angry because they didn't, but now I look, and they didn't have answers. They weren't even sure themselves how to treat it. And now they're realizing how it affects the brain, the receptors, you know.
So are we on the right track? As you mentioned, are professionals getting together and coming up with plans to tackle this
really
crisis?
do. I think where we need, though, is 28 days is not long enough for the opiate disease. It might have been for the alcoholism. I'm not sure, but a lot of these,
for treatment, it's not.
A lot of these treatment centers are still under that alcoholism treatment, and you need 90 days or more. You know, like Janet said, 7 years or more for the brain to come back. So the 90 days should be being done into inpatient. Then when they're moved into a halfway house, then their mindset's a little different. You know, like Stephen used to say to me, Mom, we get up, we go to outpatient, we come home, and they have house duties, which rightfully so. They eat, clean up, and they sit around and watch TV the rest of the evening. He said, Mom, that's when you get inside your own head.
As we all can imagine, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Slowly but surely, more detox and rehab centers are opening around the state. In Schuyler Falls, Champlain Valley Family Center will be operating one within the next few months, hopefully. And something desperately needed for the North Country for now.
Absolutely.
The options. For Stephen, were the options only in other far areas away?
Oh, yeah. Like when he'd go to detox in Potsdam, you might have only had 3 hours to get him there. I mean, and from Plattsburgh, you know, get his stuff together, and because that bed will go to somebody else if you're not there by that certain time. And the same with Hamilton Hall. If you could get him into there, you had to be there by a certain time, or that bed went somewhere else.
And how far away was that?
Oh my, Ogdensburg is Hamilton Hall.
So
I took him to St. Peter's, Albany, the time before he went in this time, and he wasn't withdrawing enough. So I got home, he called, I had to go back and get him because he was not in withdrawals enough.
So the hope is by having detox and rehab closer to home that might be able to get them in there easier and hopefully be better to have them closer to home.
Because you don't know, like, you have to keep calling these places like almost every hour on the hour. And an hour before they could say, no, we don't have a bed. An hour later they can say, yes, but can you be here in 2 hours? If not, that bed goes to someone else.
So this new center will be opening here in the North Country. Does more need to be done? Do there need to be other treatment facilities? Are there other things that still need to be accomplished?
This will be a big help, but yes, definitely we need more beds.
Yeah.
We need, when an addict says, I want help, we've got to be able to get them in, because an hour down the line, they can change their mind. You know.
When you talk with families, how comforting is it to them to have you doing this, to tell them, we've been through this, let us help you, let us help you with what's happening, let us give you some advice, let us help you cope with this? How comforting is that to them to have you folks now doing this? And what do they say to you? What's been the response?
I think very comforting.
Very.
You know, I think it's a bittersweet. Don't you?
Yes.
Bittersweet.
Most of the time when they leave, they get up and give us a hug and thank us. So that's very rewarding. For that moment, at least we comforted them. You know.
And guilt, you know, I think some people leave or approach us in guilt, and we always, both my mother and I are, no, it's you know, it's okay, you know, to embrace the positives, you know.
Yeah, we did have one lady felt real guilty that she had her son and I didn't. And I go, oh my God. No, thank God you do have your son. You know,